Okay, welcome to the first episode of GearCity 180. In this episode, we're going to turn the GearCity tutorial into a work breakdown structure, a Gantt chart, and a critical path diagram. As to why we're doing this, well, the tutorial is a well-defined project, the project being sell your first car. It also has a few very useful educational characteristics. The GearCity tutorial makes use of milestones, which are tasks with zero duration, which can often confuse students of project planning. And it has a number of dependencies in it. Certain tasks depend on each other and can't start until certain other tasks are finished. That again makes it very useful as a teaching tool. To actually create the work breakdown structures, we'll be using Project Libre, which is an open source project management software package. Its functionality and interface are very similar to Microsoft Project, the industry standard, but it's free and therefore more accessible to most students and viewers of this video. I'll also be using Excel for the critical path portion of the analysis. You'll notice that I'm using GearCity version 1.20, that's the latest stable build at the time of creating this video. GearCity is still in early access, so it's subject to change. We're going to start on normal difficulty. It really makes no difference for the tutorial, and we're going to start in 1980. The reason we're choosing it is that Project Libre cannot handle project start dates before 1970. With that being done, we can continue. Now we have to select the headquarters, and here we have Detroit. So I'm going to select Detroit as my base of operations. My company name, Viking Auto, and our company logo is going to be a nice, friendly bunny. Now we're in the office. We've already done a few tasks and we should make note of them. We chose the year start date and difficulty. We selected the location of our head office, and we entered our personal information. Altogether, I'm lumping those tasks under the umbrella category of select initial conditions. We click the door, and we go to the R&D department. Now we're going to have to design the components that are going to go into our first car. Let's start by designing a chassis. First, we have to design a chassis or have a chassis available. Then we can design an engine which takes that chassis as given. An engine which knows it has to fit into that chassis we've designed. And finally, we have to design a gearbox that works well with the engine that we've designed. So there's an order of operations that goes design chassis, design engine, design gearbox. Planning the engine will depend on planning the chassis. Planning the gearbox can't start until after you've planned the engine. The actual design stage of the chassis, engine, and gearbox can take a long time. So I'm going to use assisted design that just does all the engineering bits for me. I'm not going to adjust anything. I'm just going to ask to design it. Now we need to design our engine. And we do this in a very similar fashion. Click Design, click Engine, click Assisted. But now we're going to select the chassis that we're in the process of designing as the chassis that we want the engine to fit into. We select that, and then we start designing the engine. And finally, we'll do something very similar with the gearbox. We select the gearbox, Assisted Design, and we select the engine that we're now planning, and design it. What I haven't showed you is how long the final designs will actually take. So if we click View here, and View Chassis, it'll tell us that it will take 11 months, that's the duration, to design that chassis. Similarly, we can see that it'll take 12 months for the engine to be designed. And finally, if we look at the gearbox, we see that it'll take 11 months to design the gearbox. We have a few things that take 11 months and a few things that take 12 months. And pass time for 12 months. That will give us enough time to design all the parts we need in order to design the final vehicle. So let's do that. While we cut away, the game simulated 12 months. It is now January 1st, 1981, and everything should be ready. To check, we look at the memos on the desk. These are the memos. And you'll notice that we got 3 research complete memos corresponding to the 3 different parts that we were designing. With the 3 parts designed, we can now move on to designing our complete vehicle. Vehicle, assisted, and let's continue. So let's design the body. I'm going to select as a base model the 3346. And I'm horrible at designing vehicles, so I'm just going to keep it very basic. And there is our very first car, the bunny. I'm going to keep our default designs, and here you'll notice that the expected completion date is 4/1/1982. It's going to take a year and 3 months, 15 months. Take time forward by 15 months. Now 15 months have passed. We're now in 4/1/1982. Let's check our memos to make sure that the research has been completed. What do we do now? Well, now we bring the car into production. We're on the world map. We need to set up manufacturing of the vehicles. And to do that, we're going to select our only factory, our headquarters. And we're going to have to set up an assembly line to produce the vehicle. Once we click on our headquarters on the world map, you'll notice that we get the city information that includes a button for factories. So let's just go ahead and click on the factories button. We want to produce the car, so let's click on production. And we're going to want to set one production line, one of our 5 available production lines, to produce the car. There's a trade-off between quality and quantity, so we'll set our slider in the middle here. And we're going to assign production. We have to go to the branch to set up distribution. Here we have our 1981 Viking Auto Join ready. And we have to confirm the shipping distance. If we had more than one factory producing this car and more than one place selling the car, we'd set the shipping distance to say what was an acceptable transport distance for a branch that is selling the car to get it from. If we're producing the cars in Iceland, we don't want our New York branch importing the cars from Iceland necessarily in order to sell them. That would be very expensive. We can just go back to the office, fast forward time 1 turn to produce our cars and sell them at that office we just set up the price for. Now we're at 5/1/1982 and it's the moment of truth. We need to figure out whether we've actually sold any cars. Check our office, check our branches, and what happens? We sold 226 vehicles. Congratulations, we've finished the tutorial. Now all that's left is turning all of this into a work breakdown structure. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to Excel, and I'm going to show you a work breakdown structure in list form that I created for a similar car project. I cheated a bit. This work breakdown structure is for a tutorial that I'd completed earlier, a few days ago, and not the ones that you guys just saw me go through. So while the numbers are similar, and certainly the tasks are identical, the durations might be a little bit different. So this is what we're going to be entering into Project Libre. Note the categories that I've created. The overall project is to sell our first car. And then the kind of umbrella, first level, big thinking categories are selecting the initial conditions, preparing the car for production, and producing and distributing the vehicle. Meanwhile, preparing the car for production is broken into preparing the parts, which in turn is broken into preparing the chassis, preparing the engine, and preparing the gearbox. And apart from preparing the parts, we also need to prepare the vehicle, which depends on having prepared the parts. That's a lot of P's in those sentences. So now we've opened Project Libre, and we're going to start to create our work breakdown structure. I'm only going to show you guys a little bit of how to set up the work breakdown structure in Project Libre. This is a challenge after all. I'm also going to cheat. After I walk you guys through a bit of how to set up tasks, summary tasks, and milestones, as well as dependencies and durations in Project Libre, I'm going to switch to a completed Project Libre file for an earlier tutorial that is not identical to the one you all just saw me go through. So just keep that in mind. For our project name, we'll call it Viking Bunny. The manager will be me. And this project starts on January 1st, 1980. Let's step in our first task. The first big task is sell our first car. At this point, Project Libre knows nothing about this task other than its name, sell our first car. It's a bit confused about the duration. It's saying, is it just 1 day long? And it assumes that it starts at 8 a.m. This brings us to a bit of a problem with Project Libre. You've got to check to make sure that the calendar here doesn't have weekends blocked off as non-work days. By default, it does. I've already gone ahead earlier and made weekends into work days. Project Libre is professional project management software, and so it takes things like holidays, working hours, and other non-working time into account when trying to decide how long a project will take to complete. GearCity doesn't yet have that functionality, so we have to make a few changes to the calendar. Just keep that in mind. Right now, Project Libre thinks that sell our first car is a task that takes 1 day, perhaps, starting on January 1st, 1980 at 8 a.m. We know differently. We know that before we can sell our first car, we have to set up initial conditions. Great, now we have 2 tasks which are perhaps 1 day long. But that's not what we want. We know that setting up initial conditions is a subtask to selling our first car. So, since this is an indented list work breakdown structure, we are going to indent this task. And all of a sudden you will see that the icon for sell our first car has changed. It has changed to this black set of inverted peaks here, which indicate a summary task. We can confirm that by right-clicking on this Gantt diagram, which is what's being constructed step by step on the side here, and on bar styles, deselecting summary tasks. And you'll notice that that goes away, showing that it was a summary task. Oh, if you have sharp eyes, you may also have noticed that critical tasks are included as something you can select and deselect. In Project Libre, you can see which tasks are critical and non-critical right on the Gantt chart without having to wait for a network diagram, which can be rather nifty. So we've created the setup initial conditions task. What next? Setting up initial conditions was itself made up of several different tasks. Let's go back to the work breakdown structure I wrote earlier and see what they were. So you'll notice that select initial conditions was composed of choosing the year, choosing the player details, and selecting a location. None of these has a duration greater than 0. They're all, as far as game time is concerned, instantaneous. However, there are dependencies. First, you have to choose the year, then player details, then location. So let's do that. We indent our choose year task to indicate that it is a subtask of setting up initial conditions. Then we select initial location and select player name. We're going to correct the duration for these. It says 1 day question mark. It's asking you how long are these. We're going to change all of these to 0 duration. And you'll notice the icon changes appropriately. A milestone is a task that has 0 duration. And these are quite different than tasks which have positive durations and can affect things like how long a project takes, other than by their dependencies. That's why there's a different icon assigned to them. Milestones have this diamond icon, regular tasks have bars. So let's make these all 0 days. And next, we have to show that they depend on each other. In Project Libre, you can just do that by dragging the predecessor activity onto the successor activity, dragging the task that has to take place first into the task that has to take place second. So let's go back to Excel, and we saw that indeed I have it wrong in terms of order. First comes choose year, then comes choose player details, then comes select location. So choose year is first, then select player details. So I drag it all the way here to select player details. And you'll notice I got this nice arrow here. It took me a few tries, but if you don't see the arrow, keep trying until you do, just dragging and dropping. And next, selecting initial locations happens after we selected the player names. So let's drag initial locations to player names there. And there we have it. Let's make the durations longer just to make sure the arrows are correct. And sure enough, our dependencies are now correct. Next is our prepare car for production task, which itself has subparts: prepare parts and prepare vehicle, and prepare parts is divided into prepare chassis, prepare engine, and prepare gearbox. Since I've shown you the basics of how to set up tasks in Project Libre, this is where I'll switch to the project I finished earlier and show you how to interpret and find and access the Project Libre output. So let's do that. Once we've entered all this information, what can we do with it? Well, the first thing you can do with it is look at the Gantt chart on the right here. You'll notice a few things. The main task, sell our first car, is the entire project. Summary activities have these black bars. If you remove the summary activities, you're left with just the milestones, which are the tasks with 0 duration, and the tasks with a positive duration, as well as all the dependency arrows. If you'll notice arrows that are starting from nothing, that's because I told Project Libre that certain tasks depended not on an individual subtask finishing, but just on a group of subtasks having finished. So in this case, I told Project Libre that the prepare vehicle task couldn't start until all the parts were ready for the vehicle. And so I set prepare parts, which is a summary task, as a predecessor of prepare vehicle, which is another summary task. The other things we have are multicolored bars, which represent tasks with positive durations. But what do the colors mean? The colors are actually Project Libre's way of showing you right in the Gantt chart which tasks are critical and which are not critical. So if I take away critical tasks, you'll notice that there is only one non-critical task, and that is preparing the engine. All the other bar tasks, all the other tasks that actually have durations are critical, are red. We can look at the diagram form of the work breakdown structure. This is a pain in the neck to do by hand, and you're about to see why. Project Libre or other project management software like Microsoft Project do this for you. So as you see, it's created a very neat tree diagram with all the appropriate hierarchies that describe our project, selling our first car. Technically, Project Libre can also give you a network diagram, but their network diagrams are not particularly easy to interpret. They're correct, don't get me wrong, but they are not very user-friendly, as you can see. In this Excel file, I've created a full critical path diagram for that earlier tutorial I completed. And if I zoom out, you can see that it looks a lot easier to interpret. I've used a pretty standard paradigm where you have a 9-cell grid describing each task that you want to include in your diagram. In the middle row of the grid, you just have the task's name. At the top, you have the early start, the early finish, and the duration. At the bottom, you have the late start, the late finish, and what is most critical for critical path analysis, the slack. Since this is not a critical path method tutorial, I'm not going to tell you how to calculate the slack. But if you know what the slack is and why it's important, on this diagram, here's where you'll find it. So I've assigned one grid for each task, I've connected the grids with arrows, and I've calculated all the early start, early finish, late start, late finish, and slack for them. And then I've told Excel to use a rule and color in the slack red if it's equal to 0, and green if it's positive. What this means is that red tasks are on the critical path, green ones are not. And as you see here, there's only one green task. That is, design the chassis, and that's because it has slack of 1. Everything else has 0 slack. If I move ahead to my finished milestone, you'll notice that the project completion time here is 30 months for the project I chose. This diagram is huge. That's because in this diagram I've included all the milestones, all the tasks with 0 duration. That's done from an educational point of view to show how all the dependencies interact with each other. But to get all the results from our critical path diagram, to get all the information on which projects to crash when you need to shorten completion time, how long you can expect the project to take and all that, we don't actually need all those milestones. Because they have a 0 duration, they don't actually contribute meaningfully, except in terms of dependencies, to the overall project completion time. So I've also created a quick and dirty, simplified critical path diagram, where I have only included those tasks that have a positive duration. Those are designing the chassis, designing the engine, designing the gearbox, designing the vehicle, and selling the vehicle. As far as important timing is concerned, designing the chassis, engine, and gearbox can start immediately. That can start on January 1st, 1980. Designing the vehicle has to wait until all those other designs are complete, and selling the vehicle can only take place once the vehicle has been designed and is ready for production. If we only use these, all of a sudden the diagram is significantly simplified. And you'll notice that we get exactly the same result as we did before. We get a project completion time of 30 months. And the only activity with slack, the only non-critical activity, is designing the chassis, as before. That's it for the first episode of GearCity 180. I encourage you to try all this on your own, have fun, explore, and experiment.